Deep in the jungles of Central America, ancient stone giants rise from the canopy, pyramids swallowed by roots, palaces buried under 1,000 years of silence. For centuries, explorers who stumbled upon these ruins asked the same haunting question: who built this, and where did they go? The Maya were not a lost tribe of hunters. They were mathematicians who calculated the movements of Venus with breathtaking precision. They were astronomers who predicted eclipses before Europe understood the shape of the stars. They were architects who raised temples taller than anything in medieval England, using no metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals. And then, in the space of little more than a century, their greatest cities were abandoned. Not conquered. Not burned by an obvious invader. Simply, emptied. Kings stopped carving their victories into stone. Palaces fell silent. Farmers walked away from fields their ancestors had tended for 2,000 years. What could break a civilization this advanced, this resilient, this deeply rooted in its land? The answer lies buried in glyphs carved into limestone, in ash layers under jungle floors, in the bones of the people who stayed until the very end. This is the story of the Maya, not a myth of vanishing, but a slow, devastating unraveling written in stone, drought, and blood. And to understand how it ended, we must first understand how it began. Long before the first European ship touched the shores of the Americas, a civilization was already ancient in the lowlands and highlands stretching across what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. The Maya did not appear suddenly. Their story begins around 2000 BCE, in small farming villages scattered along rivers and lake edges, where families cultivated maize, beans, and squash in the humid heat of Mesoamerica. These early communities, part of what historians call the pre-classic period, were unremarkable at first glance: clusters of thatched houses, communal fields, modest shrines. But within these villages, the seeds of something extraordinary were being planted. Maize was not simply food to the Maya, it was sacred, believed in later mythology to be the very substance from which humans were formed. This spiritual relationship with agriculture would shape every institution the Maya eventually built. By around 1000 BCE, larger settlements began to emerge, and by 600 BCE, the first monumental architecture appeared at sites like Nakbi and El Mirador in the Petén region of modern Guatemala. El Mirador, in particular, stunned modern archaeologists when its scale was finally understood in the late 20th century. Its La Danta pyramid rises over 70 meters, making it one of the largest pyramidal structures in the ancient world by volume, rivaling structures in Egypt. This was not a primitive society experimenting with stone. This was a civilization already organizing enormous labor forces, developing hierarchical political structures, and constructing causeways, raised stone roads called sakbiab, that connected cities across the jungle. The pre-classic Maya were building an infrastructure of power centuries before the cities most people associate with the Maya, like Tikal and Palenque, reached their peak. Central to this rising civilization was an evolving system of writing. The Maya script, one of the few writing systems in human history to develop independently of outside influence, combined logograms representing whole words with syllabic signs representing sounds. This flexibility allowed Maya scribes to record not just names and dates, but full sentences, genealogies, military campaigns, religious rituals, and astronomical observations. Alongside writing came the long count calendar, an extraordinarily precise system for tracking time across vast spans, capable of dating events across thousands of years with mathematical exactness. The Maya had also independently developed the concept of zero, a mathematical achievement that predates or parallels similar developments in other ancient civilizations and reveals just how sophisticated their intellectual culture had become. As the pre-classic period gave way to the classic period, conventionally dated from around 250 CE to 900 CE, the Maya world fractured into a patchwork of competing city-states, each ruled by a divine king known as a Keohulajah, a holy lord. Unlike a single unified empire, the Maya political landscape resembled the city-states of ancient Greece, fiercely independent, often allied, frequently at war, and bound together by shared religion, language roots, and cultural practices rather than centralized rule. Tikal, in the heart of the Pedon jungle, rose to become one of the most powerful of these kingdoms. Its rival, Calakmul, controlled a vast network of allied and subordinate cities to the north. Between them stretched a rivalry that would define Maya politics for centuries, a struggle for dominance fought not only on battlefields but through marriage alliances, trade networks, and religious legitimacy. The kings of these cities were not simply political rulers. They were considered intermediaries between the human world and the realm of gods and ancestors. Maya religion described a cosmos layered into 13 heavens and 9 underworlds, all connected by a great world tree rising through the center of existence. Kings performed elaborate bloodletting rituals, piercing their tongues, ears, or genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, offering their own blood to sustain the gods and open pathways to ancestral spirits. These rituals, recorded in relief carvings on temple lintels, reveal a worldview in which political power and religious devotion were inseparable. A king who failed to perform his sacred duties, who failed to bring rain or ensure victory in battle, risked losing not just prestige but his legitimacy to rule at all. Warfare between city-states intensified during the 6th and 7th centuries CE, and nowhere is this conflict better documented than in the long struggle between Tikal and Calakmul. In 562 CE, Calakmul, allied with the city of Karakol, inflicted a devastating defeat on Tikal, an event so significant that Tikal's monument carving nearly ceased for decades afterward, a phenomenon archaeologists call the hiatus. For over a century, Tikal's fortunes waned while Calakmul's network of allied kingdoms expanded. But history in the Maya world rarely favored one side permanently. In 695 CE, under the rule of the great king Jasa Chan Kuilai, Tikal struck back, defeating Calakmul's ruler in a battle that shattered the northern kingdom's dominance and restored Tikal to preeminence. Jasa Chan Kuil commemorated this victory by constructing Temple I, the towering funerary pyramid that still dominates Tikal's great plaza today, a monument to both a military triumph and the fragile, cyclical nature of Maya political power. Trade was the circulatory system that kept this fractured world connected. Obsidian from highland Guatemala, jade from the Motagua River Valley, cacao beans used as both currency and ritual offering, brightly colored feathers from tropical birds, salt from coastal flats, and finely painted ceramics moved along river routes and jungle trails connecting cities hundreds of kilometers apart. Cacao held particular importance. Consumed as a bitter, spiced beverage reserved largely for elites and used in royal rituals, it appears repeatedly in painted vessels depicting courtly life. This trade network did more than move goods, it moved ideas, artistic styles, and religious practices, creating a shared Maya cultural identity even as political fragmentation persisted. Maya astronomy reached remarkable sophistication during the Classic period. Observatories aligned with celestial events allowed priests and astronomers to track the cycles of the sun, moon, and especially Venus, which held deep religious significance associated with warfare and the god known in later sources as Kukulkan. The Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya bark paper books to survive the destruction that followed European contact, contains detailed tables tracking the 584-day cycle of Venus with an accuracy that still impresses modern astronomers. These calculations were not abstract science divorced from daily life. They determined the timing of military campaigns, agricultural rituals, and royal ceremonies. To the Maya, the movements of the heavens and the fate of kingdoms were fundamentally intertwined. Cities like Palenque, nestled against the forested hills of Chiapas, produced some of the most refined art and architecture in the Maya world. Under the long reign of King Kinich Janab Pakal, who ruled for around 7 decades in the 7th century, Palenque constructed the Temple of the Inscriptions, within which Pakal's tomb was discovered in 1952, a jade-adorned burial chamber that stunned archaeologists and finally proved, contrary to earlier skepticism, that Maya pyramids functioned not merely as temples but as elaborate royal tombs, much like the pyramids of ancient Egypt. Pakal's sarcophagus lid, intricately carved with imagery of the king's descent into the underworld and eventual rebirth, remains one of the most studied and debated pieces of Maya art, a visual narrative of death, cosmology, and dynastic continuity. Further south, the city of Copan in modern Honduras developed a distinctive artistic tradition of deeply carved, almost sculptural stelae portraying its rulers in elaborate regalia. Copan's hieroglyphic stairway, covered with over 2,000 glyph blocks, represents the longest known Maya text, recording the dynastic history of the city across generations. Yet Copan's later history also reveals cracks in the classic Maya system. In 738 CE, a subordinate lord named Kak Tiliu Chan Yopat, ruler of the smaller city of Quirigua, captured and executed Copan's king, Waxaclajuan Abba Kawil, in an act of political rebellion almost unheard of in the era of divine kingship. This event, later commemorated in Quirigua's own monuments, exposed a truth that would become increasingly relevant in the centuries ahead: the sacred authority of Maya kings was not invulnerable, and the political order binding these city-states together was more fragile than it appeared on ceremonial stone. Beneath the grandeur of temples and the drama of royal warfare lay an agricultural system supporting enormous populations. Estimates suggest that at the height of the Classic period, the Maya lowland supported several million people, a population density that required intensive agricultural innovation. Farmers built raised fields and wetlands, terraced hillsides to prevent erosion, and managed complex water storage systems, particularly critical in regions like the northern Yucatan where rainfall was seasonal and rivers were scarce. Reservoirs at Tikal, carefully engineered and plastered to prevent seepage, could store the water needed to sustain the city's population through the dry months. This engineering brilliance, however, existed within an ecosystem under mounting pressure. Forests were cleared for agriculture, construction, and fuel at a scale that, as later research would reveal, pushed the lowland environment toward a breaking point. By the 8th century CE, the Maya world stood at its demographic and architectural peak. Cities sprawled across the landscape in numbers and density that would not be matched again in the region for centuries. And yet, within decades, this world began to collapse with a speed that still generates fierce debate among historians and archaeologists. Beginning in the southern lowlands around 800 CE and accelerating through the 9th century, city after city stopped erecting dated monuments, stopped conducting major construction projects, and saw their populations decline or vanish entirely. Copan's dynasty effectively ended around 822 CE. Tikal's last dated monument was raised in 869 CE. By 909 CE, the the once thriving culture of monumental stone carving across the southern lowlands had effectively ceased. What caused this unraveling has been debated for generations, and the honest answer, supported by decades of archaeological and paleoclimatic research, is that no single cause fully explains it. Multiple converging pressures likely combined to overwhelm the resilience of classic Maya civilization. Climate researchers, analyzing sediment cores from lakes and cave formations across the Yucatan Peninsula, have identified a series of severe droughts occurring precisely during the period of collapse, some of the most severe in the region's recorded climatic history. For a civilization utterly dependent on seasonal rainfall to sustain intensive agriculture and enormous urban populations, prolonged drought would have been catastrophic, undermining food security and destabilizing the religious authority of kings whose legitimacy rested partly on their perceived ability to secure rain and agricultural abundance. Compounding this environmental stress was the cumulative effect of centuries of deforestation and soil degradation. As populations grew, forests that had once regulated local rainfall patterns and prevented soil erosion were stripped away for agriculture and construction, potentially worsening the very droughts that were devastating the region. An early example, some researchers argue, of a civilization's environmental practices contributing to its own vulnerability. At the same time, warfare among Maya city-states appears to have intensified rather than diminished during this period of stress. Rather than uniting against a common environmental crisis, evidence from sites across the southern lowlands suggests competition for increasingly scarce resources triggered a cycle of escalating conflict, with fortifications appearing at sites that had never needed them before, and skeletal evidence at some locations showing signs of violent death consistent with warfare and social breakdown. It is critical to understand that this collapse, dramatic as it was, did not mean the disappearance of the Maya people or their culture. It was, more precisely, the collapse of a particular political system, the network of divine kingship and monumental city-states that had defined the southern lowlands for over 5 centuries. Millions of Maya people continued to live in the region, adapting, migrating, and rebuilding in new forms. The center of gravity of Maya civilization shifted northward into the Yucatan Peninsula, where cities like Chichen Itza rose to prominence in the years following the southern collapse, entering what archaeologists call the post-classic period. Chichen Itza represents a fascinating fusion of Maya tradition and influences from central Mexico, most likely connected to interactions with Toltec culture, though the exact nature of this relationship remains debated among scholars. Its central pyramid, known as El Castillo or the Temple of Kukulkan, was engineered with such precision that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow along the pyramid's staircase resembling a serpent descending toward the earth, a deliberate astronomical and architectural achievement demonstrating that Maya scientific sophistication had not disappeared with the southern cities, but had evolved and relocated. The city's great ball court, the largest in Mesoamerica, hosted a ritual sport combining athletic competition with profound religious symbolism, in which the movement of a solid rubber ball was understood to echo the movement of celestial bodies and the eternal struggle between life and the underworld. Chichen Itza's dominance eventually gave way to another northern power, Mayapan, a fortified city that controlled much of the Yucatan through a system of alliance and tribute until its own political structure fractured in the mid-15th century amid internal rebellion. By the time Spanish explorers first encountered the Maya world in the early 16th century, the grand unified networks of the classic period were long gone, replaced by numerous smaller, independent Maya kingdoms across the Yucatan and highland Guatemala, still practicing many of the religious and cultural traditions inherited from their ancestors, still speaking Mayan languages, still reading and writing in forms of the ancient script, though never again reaching the scale of Tikal or Calakmul at their height. The arrival of the Spanish brought a new and devastating chapter. Unlike the swift conquest of the Aztec Empire by Hernán Cortés, the conquest of the Maya region proved agonizingly slow, stretching across nearly 2 centuries due to the fragmented political landscape that had persisted since the post-classic period. There was no single capital to capture, no single emperor whose defeat would end resistance. Francisco de Montejo and his son led repeated campaigns into the Yucatan beginning in the 1520s, facing fierce resistance from Maya polities who understood the landscape intimately and fought a prolonged, grinding war of attrition. In the highlands of Guatemala, Pedro de Alvarado led brutal campaigns against the Kich and other highland Maya groups beginning in 1524, marked by extraordinary violence and exploitation of existing rivalries between Maya kingdoms. Disease proved even more devastating than warfare. Smallpox, measles, and other diseases introduced from Europe, to which indigenous populations had no immunity, swept through Maya communities in repeated waves, killing an estimated majority of the population across the 16th century in some regions. A demographic catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale that fundamentally altered the trajectory of Maya society before Spanish colonial administration had even fully established itself. Spanish missionaries, most notoriously Bishop Diego de Landa in the Yucatan, conducted campaigns to eradicate Maya religious practices, destroying countless bark paper codices in a 1562 auto de fe at Mani, an act of cultural destruction that erased the vast majority of written Maya knowledge, leaving only 4 confirmed codices known to survive into the modern era: the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices, fragile windows into a written tradition that once numbered in the thousands. Yet even Landa, in an irony that has proven invaluable to modern historians, recorded significant information about Maya language, calendar systems, and customs in his own writings, inadvertently preserving fragments of the very culture his campaigns sought to destroy. The last independent Maya kingdom, the Itzá kingdom centered at the island city of Najpatan in Lake Petén Itzá, held out against Spanish conquest until 1697, nearly 2 centuries after Columbus first reached the Caribbean, a testament to the resilience and determination of Maya political and cultural identity in the face of overwhelming external pressure. The story of the Maya, however, does not end in the 17th century, and it is essential to state clearly what is often obscured in popular imagination: the Maya never vanished. Today, more than 6 million people across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras identify as Maya, speaking around 30 distinct Mayan languages descended from the same linguistic roots that produced the hieroglyphic texts of Tikal and Palenque. Traditional agricultural practices, religious syncretism blending Catholic and ancestral Maya cosmology, and cultural traditions stretching back millennia continue to shape daily life in Maya communities across the region. The devastating irony of popular culture's obsession with a lost, or mysterious, vanished civilization obscures a more powerful truth: the Maya adapted, endured centuries of colonial oppression, and persist as a living culture into the present day. Modern archaeology has transformed our understanding of the Maya dramatically in recent decades. The breakthrough decipherment of Maya hieroglyphic writing, achieved through the combined efforts of scholars including Yuri Norizov, Linda Skeel, David Stewart, and many others across the 20th century, unlocked historical records that had sat silent in stone for over 1,000 years, revealing detailed dynastic histories, military campaigns, and royal biographies previously invisible to researchers who had only artistic and archaeological evidence to work with. More recently, the application of LiDAR technology, laser scanning capable of penetrating dense jungle canopy to reveal structures hidden beneath, has revealed that the scale of Maya urbanization was far greater than previously imagined, uncovering vast networks of causeways, agricultural terraces, and settlements suggesting population densities in the ancient lowlands that rival or exceed many modern estimates for the region. What remains most striking about the Maya story is not simply the scale of their achievement, nor even the mystery of their political collapse, but the resilience embedded in their long history. This was a civilization that endured for over 3,000 years, weathering the rise and fall of individual dynasties, environmental catastrophe, foreign invasion, and colonial subjugation, only to persist into the present as a living, breathing culture rather than a historical footnote. The pyramids of Tikal and the carved stairways of Copan are not gravestones marking an extinct people. They are monuments left behind by ancestors of millions who still walk the same land, speak languages descended from the glyphs carved into those very stones, and carry forward a cultural inheritance that has survived droughts, wars, plagues, and empires, a testament to the extraordinary endurance of human civilization against odds that, by any measure, should have erased it entirely.